Have you ever had a really great hope? Something that you wanted to happen so badly. Once, I was in the Boy Scouts, and we went on a trip to Camp Tuckabashie. Anybody know where Camp Tuckabashie is? I don't either. But I was fortunate to be a part of a troop in my hometown, and we went to Camp Tuckabashie, and I, as a young Boy Scout, went where all the cool kids were, and I wanted to be with the cool kids. I was pretty young, and there were older scouts who seemed to know what they were doing. They knew all the knots. People trusted them with axes and with fire. All the fun stuff that scouts got to do. I was too young. I wanted to be one of the cool kids. I hoped that I could be cool like them. So in my desire to be cool, you know what I did? I hung out with them. I kind of stayed off on the side, and I would be near the cool kids at Boy Scout camp. It just so happens that one day we had this, I guess you could call it a water festival. And people had squirt guns, and people had water balloons, and people had all kinds of stuff. We were all in bathing suits, and so we're out in this field, and of course all the cool kids, they had a bucket full of water balloons. And they stood around that bucket, watching the chaos in front of them. And I stood kind of close by, and there was one particular scout who knew who I was. He said, "Hey, Jack, did you bring any water balloons? Did you bring a squirt gun? What did you, And I said, well, I'm just here." He said, "Well, come on, grab a water balloon, see what you can do." And in my hope to be one of the cool kids, I came up and I grabbed one of those water balloons, and I just looked up and I chucked it out into the field. It was this beautiful, amazing moment. There's this one kid, he just was kind of running across the side, and that water balloon arced through the air. I couldn't have done this if I tried. That water balloon came down and it whacked that kid right here. Boosh! He was fine. Kid was fine. But all of the cool kids go, "Whoa! You're a cool kid, Jack." Oh man, have you ever had one of your hopes discovered like that? I couldn't have aimed it if I tried. I couldn't have been cool if I tried. I just, on a whim, just decided to give it a go. Just chucked it. And again, the kid was fine, right? I'm still hoping to be cool. I'm still working on it. I don't chuck a lot of water balloons anymore. But it's Easter. You ready to give it a go with me? You want to be one of the cool kids? Yeah. You are. He is risen. He is risen. Today we celebrate the resurrection. And what does that even mean? How can we, people who have not seen someone rise from the dead, join together in faith and proclaim that Jesus Christ does defeat death and invites us to do the same? You are simply like every other human being who's ever lived if you balk at the prospect that death can be defeated. It is understandable if you feel anger, despair, or perhaps maybe you've grown numb or indifferent to the trials of this world. And breaking into our darkness is Christ's resurrection. There is hope to be found this morning, and I'm going to plead the case that the resurrection can be our hope and can make life worth living. It's better than being a cool kid. Luke 24 gives us a window into how Peter and the early disciples experienced that very first Easter morning. Let me ask you, what is one thing that has filled you with hope? I'm not in the Boy Scouts anymore. It's been a while. I still look back on those days fondly. But what is one thing that has given you hope, that has filled you with hope? Now, I don't ask that question flippantly. Hope is always with us, and where we direct it is often important. Alexander Pope famously said that hope springs internal in the hearts of humanity. It is hope that bids us to continue in life, in love, no matter our disappointments. There are in our lives a multitude of hopes. Some of them are small, like the buttons on our shirt. Some of them are big, like our children, like our church, like our jobs, like our family, like the person to our right and to our left. Our hopes are many. The disciples had hoped that Jesus would be the one to save them. Jerusalem and Israel had hoped that Jesus would free them from the bondage that the Roman Empire had brought upon them. Peter, as we remembered on Friday, it was just Friday, denied Jesus 3 times. This scripture begins in darkness. Easter morning does not begin with the hope of the resurrection. It begins with some kind of hope that kind of is hard to explain, that I bet that each and every one of us can understand. The women come to the tomb hoping to honor their dead. In verse 1, it says that their hope in whatever they expected to find, it was certainly less than victory over death. What they experienced was the turning point for them, because those women, became the very first witnesses to the good news. I think we downplay the importance of returning to the tomb. I think we underestimate how courageous and how brutal it must have been for them and for Peter to recognize and to confront death. Surely, inside those women and inside of Peter was some small hope. Surely, that hope is in you today. What are we going to do with it? On Easter morning, we discover that no matter what this life brings our way, we can face it like those women and like Peter. We can run towards the tomb. We can run towards the tomb. In verse 12, Peter doesn't run away from the tomb, he runs towards it. Why? A tomb is a place of death. A tomb is a place of endings. A tomb is a place where they roll a big stone in front of the door and you cannot escape. But Peter runs to the tomb. Why? Does Peter run to the tomb because he believes or because he doubts? Y'all, perhaps it doesn't matter why he goes. It's some kind of hope that drives him there. And when the women return from the tomb to tell the disciples the good news, what is their reaction? They don't just say they don't believe. They dismiss it. The Greek is clear. The disciples believe what the women are saying is garbage. It's a bunch of rubbish. Now, I'm going to say the thing, and I need you to respond the way we're supposed to respond. He is risen. He is risen. Let's try it the way the disciples would do it. He is risen. He is risen. That's garbage. Could you imagine if you greeted someone on Easter morning and said, "He is risen," and they said, "Nonsense." Y'all, it's understandable. What are we going to do with this good news? How are we going to find ourselves on Easter morning? There's much truth, much honesty to be found in the part of us that doesn't believe it, can't believe it, won't believe it. Thank God for Easter. Because Peter, yes, Peter, the same Peter that would leave everything and follow some rabbi, the same Peter who was ambitious enough to try to walk on water, the same Peter who would declare that Jesus is the Son of God, the same Peter that would deny Jesus 3 times, This is the guy who has the audacity to run to the tomb. Could it really be true? I can hear Peter asking himself as hope is nipping at his heels. Can it be true? The last place Peter's hope was found is inside that tomb. Dead, buried, underneath the weight of the world. Peter runs back to that place. He runs to the tomb, and we can too. Even after our biggest mistakes, even after the worst case scenarios play out, can we still be people of hope? We must trade our wondering for wondering. There's a lily. See, that's what happens when you wonder. When you don't stand behind the pulpit. You move around. You do your thing, and sometimes bump things. Isn't this how we go through life? Wondering? Not always. When we were young, when we were naive, we thought we could make a difference. We thought we could do something special, and we wondered about what the future could hold, and somewhere along the lines, life happened. We learned the truth of the world out there, while all the while the world was in here. And we start wandering. We start just kind of letting things happen. We start shrugging at things. We stop addressing sins and hurts because we aren't sure how to respond. We need to trade our wandering for wondering. It is understandable to go through life wandering around. Maybe you've been dazed, confused, perhaps you've been disenchanted, disheartened, or disinherited. All of Peter's experiences with Jesus, whether on Easter morning or in the years of ministry together before, Peter looked back and he realized that his time with Jesus meant he could stop wandering. He didn't just have to shrug at the world. He didn't just have to shrug at himself. He didn't have to shrug at evil he saw. Following Jesus meant he could be intentional about life. He could place his hope in someone, in something. Peter could make life beautiful. Of course, all this comes crashing down in the events of Holy Week, but it's restored again in the events of this morning. In verse 12, Peter left the tomb and he began wondering to himself about what had happened. His hope transformed what he believed was possible. See, guys, if death is defeated, if it cannot stop us, what do you have to be afraid of? Nothing. Nothing in this world. You can't threaten someone who isn't afraid of death. Easter morning, it's not about Peter losing his doubt. It isn't about Peter even not being Peter anymore. Easter morning is not about Peter. It is instead about Peter regaining hope, because Easter morning is about Jesus. It's about what God is truly capable of. It is about us regaining our hope. Anybody in here need some hope? Yes, praise be to God. There is hope to be found in Easter morning. Death cannot hold Jesus down. He is alive. He stops wondering. Peter stops wondering towards death and starts wondering about life. We like to talk about how the tomb is empty on Easter morning. And yes, Jesus isn't there anymore. But the tomb is never really empty. Even in Luke's Gospel, in verses 5 through 8, shows that angels inhabit the place of death. They remind the women to shift, to stop wondering and start wondering through life about what God is capable of. Why do you look for the living among the dead, they say? Remember when he told you what resurrection might look like? It is the last and the great hope for us all. That hope changes how we live, not just how we die. The craziest part of Easter is that an empty tomb isn't the greatest action of our Savior. In John chapter 14, Jesus reminds the disciples that they can believe, and that is going to be what brings even greater works than He. The Gospels don't end at the tomb. Easter is still going on. We can wonder at what God is capable of, what we are capable of. There's hope for us all. There is hope for us all. Jesus is not some superhero who bursts out of the tomb with a cape on, flying through the air to bring vengeance to his enemies. The core of each message is that Jesus is not here. He is risen. Good night. It's catching. It's catching. And you know, sometimes, if I'm being honest, before we can hear the proclamations of the trumpets, before we can describe with our hearts and with our beings and with our heads and with our souls, He is risen. He is risen. It happens quietly first. There's hope to be found. The angels remind the women that they must rethink what Jesus has already told them when they were back home in Galilee. And we today, we must rethink what Jesus has told us in the midst of our lives. We get to find Jesus. We get to discover God's life in our lives. I was fortunate that I got to grow up in a church like Gadsden Street. A place where people who knew better had a lot of hope in me. And sometimes I was fortunate in that church to get to play with other children. And so I would go with the kids and we would be in the church. Have you ever wandered around in the church when nobody's chasing you or looking for you or maybe having some fun things? Yes, I got in trouble a lot, okay. But one particular night we were playing hide and seek. And so the kids scattered, someone started counting. And I found the best hiding place at Dadeville First United Methodist Church. It wasn't in the attic. It wasn't in the basement. It wasn't in the sanctuary. There was a room off to the side, upstairs, where the church kind of put all the things that it didn't need to use anymore. Every church has one. But in that room was an altar. And that altar happened to be hollow. It was like this, but it was more of a box. And the sides all had walls, but the back didn't. And as a kid, while we were playing hide and seek, I pushed that altar away from that wall in this quiet, still room up in the upstairs of this church. And I got inside the altar, and I scooted it back to the wall. Y'all, I can still be there right now. They never would have found me. Ever. In fact, what's interesting about hiding in that altar is I went from hoping nobody would find me to praying to God that somebody would find me. I didn't say. I pushed out, came out, and everybody was like, "Where have you been?" I've been at the altar. I've been with Jesus. I've been in the church. See, Easter is in a lot of ways about hiding in the altar. Tomb, whatever. But we can't stay there. There's hope for everyone. You know, there are people in this world right now who don't believe that they are loved. There are people in this world right now, because of their circumstances, sometimes of their own choosing and sometimes not. They don't know God's real. And while I hate that for them, I'm excited about what it means that you and I get to do. About the hope we get to share. There's hope for everyone. We get to live as Easter people. Folks who have discovered resurrection, not because we understand how it happened, not because we get the physics of it, Not because we find Jesus in the tomb even, but because we have hope. We can live life in a way that we will encounter him. Because he is living, breathing, moving, loving. And I hope that we will find him. And you can hope that death will not stop Jesus. And God will hope that we will all come to discover that we are loved more than we can possibly imagine. He is risen.
He is risen.